Hi everybody, welcome to week 4 of Poetry for Prose Writers. Great discussions last week, and I look forward to reading your lyric poems that you turned in your journals last week. I look forward to reading those. In week 4, we move on to forms and structure. On the reading and discussion page, you'll read the forms chapter of our text, Don't Read Poetry. We'll also look at videos and read some material about Mona Van Dyne and Molly Peacock. We'll also look quickly at what I call the spine, which is something Kish Johnson talked about in a craft talk here at Lindenwood a couple years ago, and I've also given you the text of what Twyla Tharp called the spine. We'll also look at a video about constraints and how that has an impact on creativity. And finally, you'll also share a formal poem that you've read recently. In your journals for next week, or this coming week, you'll turn in a poem that introduces a character, kind of based on chapter 3 of Don't Read Poetry. So, what struck me in this week's chapter from Don't Read Poetry? Bert gives us so much to chew on each and every page, not just each and every chapter. I guess what I wanted to comment on was the fact that free verse is not necessarily formless. Here's what she says on page 105. Frost's famous quip that free, meterless, rhymeless verse is like tennis with no net falls apart once you see that free verse has its own rules. T.S. Eliot's almost equally snarky remark that vers libre, that is, free verse, does not exist, holds up a bit better, since what he meant was just that free verse, or verse without rhyme or meter, must establish patterns of other sorts. So I truly, believe this, and I guess to Frost, I would say that, we've been playing racquetball and squash without nets for a long time, and we get some pretty good games out of it. But I think Eliot had it right. We are humans, and we like or even need patterns to hold on to. Free verse discovers or develops its own set of patterns and rules. So this conflict between traditionalist forms and non-traditionalist forms is the context in which I learned from my teachers, who are all gone now. They were the generation that chose, for many reasons, to break free from academic, traditionalist, formal poetry. They broke away from archaic diction and syntax. They broke away from rhymed couplets and dutiful meter, be it tetrameter or pentameter. These 20th century poets, mid-20th century poets, Merwin, Rich, Wright, Bly, Cannell, they moved away from their teachers' traditions to explore new and different patterns of poetry. And they were much more open to free verse or discussing free verse in the MFA programs of the 80s, where I was. In fact, back then, traditional forms became kind of dated. Today, thankfully, there's been much more openness to all forms, formal or not, and all patterns and ways to write poems. And I think that's kind of what Bert is getting at it in the chapter as a whole. So one of the things I like about forms is constraints. See the video that's about creative constraints this week and how they can bring about, new creative energy. But I will always ask a poet who will only write using rhymes and strict meter to consider what they are giving up for those rhymes and for those marching feet. I'll always ask them at least to consider that. Okay, that's my spiel on traditionalist forms versus free verse. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all online throughout the week.